the bell in the watchtower rang. Boom, boom, boom. From the depths of the ocean, something massive began to rise, a shadow darker than the night itself. In the palace, the king felt it, a sudden pain in his chest. He gasped, clutching his heart. His veins glowed silver, pulsing, stretching as if something inside him was trying to escape. Then he woke up.
Well, well. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, you need to subscribe.
The village of Blackshore clung to the edge of the world. For generations, the villagers lived in harmony with the ocean, drawing sustenance from its depths and respecting its mysteries. But that was before the king's decree. King Eric, once a beloved ruler, had grown old and desperate. His hair turned silver, his hands trembled, and his once booming voice now cracked with frailty. He feared death above all else, and when a wandering sage whispered of mermaid scales that could reverse time and grant eternal youth, the king's obsession consumed him. One fateful day, the king stood on the palace balcony, his voice carried by the wind to every corner of Blackshore. Bring me the scales, meat of mermaids, and you shall be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. Gold, land, titles, all shall be yours. Let no man rest until these creatures are found. The villagers, once humble and content, now saw the sea not as a provider but as a treasure trove. The fishermen sharpened their harpoons, their eyes gleaming with greed. The hunt had begun. Nelson was not like the others. A weathered fisherman with calloused hands and a heart as deep as the ocean, he had always respected the sea. He taught his son, Jaden, to do the same. The sea gives and takes, Nelson would say. We must never take more than we need. One crisp morning, as the sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, Nelson and Jaden set out in their small fishing boat. The air was thick with the scent of salt, and the waves lapped gently against the hull. Jaden, a boy of 10 with wide, curious eyes, leaned over the edge, peering into the water. "Father, do you think we'll ever see a mermaid?" Jaden asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Nelson chuckled. "Mermaids are shy creatures, lad. They don't show themselves to just anyone." But fate had other plans. As they cast their nets, the water churned violently. Nelson's strong hands struggled to pull the net in, and when it finally broke the surface, they both gasped. There, tangled in the ropes, was a mermaid. Her scales shimmered like liquid silver, catching the sunlight and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Her hair, long and dark, clung to her delicate shoulders, and her eyes wide and luminous stared at them with a mixture of fear and defiance. She was young, no older than Jaden, but there was a regal air about her, as if the ocean itself bowed to her will. Jaden's breath caught in his throat. "She's beautiful," he whispered. Nelson's heart ached. He had heard the stories of how mermaid scales could heal any ailment, how their flesh could turn back time. The king's reward would set them for life. But as he looked into the mermaid's eyes, he saw not a monster, but a Sula soul that deserved to live. Nelson's heart sank. He knew what the king's decree demanded, but he couldn't bring himself to harm the creature. The mermaid thrashed weakly, her voice a soft, melodic cry that seemed to echo the sorrow of the sea itself. "Father," Jaden said, his voice trembling, "we can't hurt her." Nelson nodded, his resolve hardening. "You're right, lad. We're not murderers." With gentle hands, they untangled the mermaid from the net. She watched them warily, her tail flicking as if ready to flee. But as Nelson lifted her and placed her back into the water, she paused. Her eyes met Jaden's, and for a moment the world stood still. Then, with a graceful flick of her tail, she disappeared into the depths. Unknown to them, the mermaid they freed was Ailira. She was the princess of the ocean, a little girl that wandered off course against her father will. When Nelson and Jaden returned to the village empty-handed, the other fishermen mocked them. You had a mermaid in your net, and you let it go. Fool, the king would have made you rich." Nelson simply replied, "Some things are more important than gold. Above all, she was too little experience of such cruelty." Jaden, though young, never forgot the mermaid's eyes, the gratitude, the intelligence. Little did he know, that act of mercy would one day save their life. The grand hall of King Eric's palace was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their light reflecting off gilded walls and polished marble floors. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and goblets overflowing with wine. The air was thick with the scent of spices and the murmur of nobles, their laughter echoing through the hall. At the head of the room sat King Eric, his once regal frame now hunched with age. His eyes, however, burned with a feverish intensity, darting eagerly toward the massive double doors at the far end of the hall. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks. The doors creaked open, and a hush fell over the room. Two fishermen, their faces flushed with pride and their hands calloused from years at sea, entered dragging a large water-filled crate. Inside, a mermaid thrashed weakly, her scales glinting like shards of moonlight. Her hair, dark and tangled, clung to her face, and her eyes wide and luminous darted around the room in terror. The king rose from his throne, his voice trembling with excitement. "At last, bring it to me." The fishermen hauled the crate forward, their boots leaving wet tracks on the marble floor. When they reached the foot of the throne, they bowed deeply, their chests puffing with pride. "Your Majesty," said the eldest fisherman, a burly man with a beard streaked with grey, "we present to you a mermaid, caught this very morning. Her scales are the finest we've ever seen." The king descended the steps, his movements slow but deliberate. He leaned over the crate, his eyes narrowing as he studied the mermaid. She recoiled, her tail slapping against the water as she tried to retreat, but the crate was too small. Her gills flared, and a low, mournful sound escaped her lips, a song of despair that sent a shiver through the room. "Magnificent," the king whispered, his voice dripping with greed. He reached out, his bony fingers brushing against her scales. "Such power, such beauty, and soon it will all be mine." The mermaid's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment the king hesitated. There was something in her gaze, a spark of defiance, a glimmer of intelligence that made his stomach twist. But he quickly shook it off, his obsession overriding any flicker of doubt. "You have done well," the king said, turning to the fisherman. "Your reward shall be as promised." He snapped his fingers, and servants hurried forward with chests of gold coins. The fisherman's eyes widened as they lifted the lids, the clink of metal filling the air. They bowed again, their gratitude effusive. "Thank you, Your Majesty. We are honored to serve you." The king waved them away, his attention already returning to the mermaid. "Chef," he barked, "prepare her for tonight's feast. I want every scale, every ounce of her essence. Do not waste a single drop." The royal chef, a portly man with a blood-stained apron, stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Yes, Your Majesty, it will be done." As the fishermen left, their pockets heavy with gold, the chef and his assistants began their grim work. They lifted the crate and carried it toward the kitchens as the doors swung shut behind them. The king returned to his throne, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He raised his goblet, the wine within glinting like blood in the candlelight. "To immortality," he declared. The nobles raised their glasses, their voices echoing his toast. But beneath their cheers, a sense of unease lingered, a faint whisper of guilt, a premonition of the storm to come. The grand dining hall of Blackshore Palace flickered with the warm glow of golden candlelight, the scent of spiced wine and roasted meats thick in the air. At the long banquet table, King Aldrich sat at the head, his frail hands drumming impatiently against the polished wood. His sunken eyes burned with anticipation as servants carried in silver-plated trays, their lids gleaming beneath the crystal chandeliers. The nobles leaned forward in curiosity, their jeweled rings clinking against goblets as they whispered amongst themselves. The moment had arrived. With a dramatic flourish, the royal chef, a stout man with a face slick with nervous sweat, lifted the lids. Steam rose in delicate tendrils, revealing an exquisite dish, thinly sliced mermaid fillet, seared to perfection, its silver-blue scales glistening like liquid stardust. The flesh, soft and almost translucent, shimmered under the light as if it were still alive. A hush fell over the hall. The king licked his dry lips, his hands trembling as he reached for his golden fork. The nobles followed suit, lifting their utensils with cautious eagerness. Slowly, reverently, they took the first bite. The texture was strange. At first, it was thick and slimy, coating their tongues like mucus. A few nobles grimaced, their faces twitching with disgust. One reached for his goblet of wine to wash it down, while another stifled a gag. But then something changed. As they chewed, the flavor deepened, turning impossibly rich, like the purest essence of the sea itself. A warmth spread through their bodies, a soothing golden sensation that trickled down their throats and settled in their bones. The king inhaled sharply. The frailty in his limbs seemed to melt away. His spine, once hunched with age, straightened. The persistent ache in his joints vanished as though it had never been there. His heartbeat, slow and labored just moments before, now pulsed with renewed vigor. A clarity like never before sharpened his thought. She could see the past, the present, the very threads of fate itself. The nobles gasped in unison as the sensation swept over them. Wrinkles smoothed, grey hairs darkened, vision sharpened. Their laughter, once frail and hollow, now rang with youthful vitality. The transformation was undeniable. The mermaid's flesh was power. The king's command. King Eric rose to his feet, his voice thunderous and filled with an energy he had not known in decades. "This," he breathed, gripping the edge of the table, his hands no longer trembling. "This is the key." The whispers were true. He turned to his attendants, his newfound strength making his presence even more imposing. "Bring me the town chief. Tell him the time has come to prepare the potion of eternal youth. We will forge a kingdom untouched by age." The nobles erupted into applause, their greed glistening in their newly brightened eyes. The king raised a single hand, silencing the room. His hunger had not been satisfied, it had only just begun. "Double the rewards," he declared. "Land, gold, and titles to any who bring me more mermaids. Let no corner of the sea remain unexplored. Let no creature escape." A chilling enthusiasm spread among the court, their minds filled with visions of endless youth and limitless power. The hunt would begin anew, more ruthless than ever. But outside, beyond the castle walls, the waves began to churn. The tide whispered secrets to those who would listen. And deep beneath the surface, something ancient stirred in the abyss, awakened by the blood of its kin. The ocean would not forgive. The king's messengers wasted no time. Within the hour, the grand doors of the palace burst open, revealing the town chief, Odoran, an aged man draped in dark robes embroidered with alchemical symbols. His presence alone commanded reverent whispers of his knowledge stretched beyond Blackshore, speaking of a man who had once dabbled in arts forbidden by both land and sea. King Aldrich, standing taller and stronger than he had in years, gestured impatiently. "You have been summoned for a matter of great importance, Chief Odoran." The old man's eyes flickered over the noblesome of whom he had treated for ailments that no ordinary healer could cure. He knew something unnatural was at play. Then his gaze fell upon the silver-scaled flesh resting on a golden platter before the king. the mermaid's flesh. Odiran stiffened. For years, he had warned against meddling with the sea's magic. The ocean had its own rules, its own balance. Tampering with it could unravel things beyond mortal comprehension. But here it was. The mermaid's essence. And from the way the nobles' faces glowed with newfound youth, the legends were true. The king stepped forward, his sharp gaze piercing through Odiran's hesitation. "I want immortality. Can it be done?" Odiran exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing the ancient sigils on his robe. "It can be done, Your Majesty," he admitted, "but the cost will be great." The king's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Name your price." Odiran's jaw tightened. "Not my price. The price the ocean will demand." The king's expression darkened. "You let me worry about the ocean. Do as I command." Reluctantly, Odiran bowed. "Then I will need all the mermaid's scales, a vial of her blood, and the heart of a man who has taken a mermaid's life." The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Taking a mermaid's life was already monstrous enough, but to sacrifice one of their own. A tense silence followed. Then the king let out a cold chuckle. "That won't be a problem." He turned to his guards. "Find the fisherman who made the kill. He will serve his kingdom one last time." The guards saluted and marched out. The hunt was no longer just for mermaids. The town's secret apothecary, hidden beneath layers of stone and ancient runes, had not been used in years. It was here, in the dim candlelight, that Odiran began his work. The mermaid's scales were crushed into a fine, glimmering powder, their glow fading as they dissolved into a bubbling black cauldron. The blood, thick and rich with magic, was dripped in slow, deliberate intervals, causing the liquid to shift colors: deep blue, then violent crimson, then a luminous silver. Odiran murmured incantations passed down through generations, his voice cracking under the weight of knowledge he was never meant to use. The ocean's magic was not meant for men. The heart of the fisherman, freshly cut, still warm, was placed in the center of the potion. The room trembled. The liquid boiled violently, sending sparks into the air. The shadows along the walls twisted, and for the briefest moment, Odiran swore he heard a voice, a whisper from the depths.
"You have sealed their fate."
A sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles. The potion was complete. Odiran, sweating despite the cold air, filled a golden chalice with the glowing silver-blue liquid. He stared into its swirling depths, his own reflection warping into something unrecognizable. With heavy steps, he carried it back to the palace. The grand hall was filled once more. The nobles, still basking in their newfound vitality from the mermaid's flesh, watched in eager anticipation as the chalice was placed before the king. King Aldrich wasted no time. He lifted the cup and drank deeply. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a ripple of pure energy surged through him. The room gasped. His skin, once wrinkled, smoothed. His hair darkened from silver to raven black. His eyes, once clouded with age, gleamed with an unnatural sharpness. His body straightened, gaining the strength of a man in his prime. The king had conquered time. He let out a breathless laugh, staring at his hands in disbelief. "It worked," he whispered. Then louder, "It worked." The nobles erupted in cheers. The kingdom of Blackshore would now have an eternal king. But Odiran did not celebrate. He turned to the window, where the ocean's waves crashed angrily against the cliffs. He could feel it. The sea knew. And it would come for its revenge. That night, the tides did not recede. The fishermen who had hunted the mermaids found their boats overturned, their bodies washing ashore with their eyes still open in terror. A thick fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the village whole. The stars disappeared behind an unnatural darkness, and the waves whispered in voices no human could understand. Then came the drowned ones. Figures emerged from the water humanoid, but wrong. Their bodies were bloated, covered in scales and barnacles, their mouths twisted in eternal agony. Some were the very men who had captured the mermaid, now cursed by the ocean's wrath. The villagers screamed as the drowned ones walked through the streets, their presence bringing the stench of salt and decay. And then, the bell in the watchtower rang. Boom, boom, boom. From the depths of the ocean, something massive began to rise, a shadow darker than the night itself. In the palace, the king felt it, a sudden pain in his chest. He gasped, clutching his heart. His veins glowed silver, pulsing, stretching as if something inside him was trying to escape. Then he woke up. It was all a dream, a horrible nightmare, but unknown to him. The mermaid's curse had begun. With the king reborn in youth, Blackshore changed. At first, it was subtle. The land grew greener, the harvests doubled, and the once restless tides seemed to favor the village. Fishermen returned with overflowing nets, merchants grew rich overnight, and the kingdom, once modest, swelled with wealth and power. But prosperity came at a cost. The hunt for mermaids became a way of life. No longer was it just the fishermen. Now, hunters, traders, and warriors joined in, crafting new weapons to ensnare and subdue the ocean's mythical creatures. Boats were built not for fishing, but for capturing. Entire fleets were sent out, scouring the sea for mermaids like they were nothing more than exotic livestock. Then, the marketplace opened. Set in the very heart of Blackshore, the tide market became the kingdom's new center of power. Rows of cages lined the square, filled with mermaids, some young, others ancient, their once majestic scales dulled from captivity. Banners of blue and silver waved in the air, bearing the new royal sigil, a mermaid ensnared within a golden net. Traders barked their prices, boasting about the quality of their stock. This one sings, a siren's voice worth 10 times the gold. A healer, her scales can cure any disease. A royalty deserves such a prize. Strong this one, kill her now, harvest her bones before the magic fades. It was madness, and King Eric, as if reborn anew, was at the center of it all. His lust for youth had not faded. If anything, it had grown worse. The king ruled with an iron grip, his obsession with power deepening. He believed mermaids held secrets beyond immortality, perhaps, the ability to make him a god. He sent fleets farther and farther into the unknown waters. He demanded more sacrifices, forcing hunters to return with twice the number of mermaids each month. He experimented on them, ordering his apothecaries to extract their essence, hoping to uncover the secrets of eternal strength, knowledge, and invincibility. Those who failed him were punished. Those who refused him were executed. It was an age of gold, blood, and fear. A father and son against the world. But not everyone bowed to this new empire. Nelson the fisherman, who had once freed a young mermaid, refused to take part in the trade. He watched in silence as his village succumbed to greed and cruelty. His son, Jaden, now older, asked him one night, "Why don't we fight back?" Nelson looked toward the same sea that had once nourished their people, now turned into a graveyard of mermaid bones. He sighed, because the ocean never forgets. Jaden frowned. Then why hasn't it fought back? Nelson had no answer, but deep in his bones, he knew. The ocean was waiting. And when it struck, it would not show mercy. Then, one fateful night, trouble arrived. The tides, once calm, shifted unnaturally. Fishermen who had never feared the waters now spoke in hushed voices about things moving beneath the surface. Mermaids, once silent in their captivity, began to whisper, their voices carrying songs no one understood. And then, the first omen came. A merchant tone of the richest men in Blackshore, a man who had built his fortune trading mermaid flesh, was found in his home. Dead. His body was bloated, his skin covered in iridescent scales, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The healers swore his lungs were filled with salt water. But there had been no drowning, no water in his house. The ocean had touched him without ever stepping ashore. Panic spread. Was it a disease, a curse, or something worse? And then, the second omen. One night, under a blood-red moon, every mermaid in captivity fell silent. No crying, no weeping, no sounds at all. Just a cold, eerie silence that stretched from the tide market all the way to the king's palace. It was the kind of silence that came before a storm. And then, at dawn, the ocean itself began to move. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this.